Some of the most shocking twists in history happened because of seemingly logical decisions that went horribly wrong. From selling entire territories for a pittance to ignoring glaring safety protocols, humanity has made choices that shape the world in ways no one could have imagined. These moments teach us the power of decision-making and its far-reaching consequences. Today, we'll uncover 13 of the most astonishing decisions that changed the world forever, filled with intriguing details you might not have heard before. The sale of Alaska. In 1867, Russia sold Alaska to the United States for just $7.2 million, a deal negotiated by U.S. Secretary of State William Seward. At the time, the sale was ridiculed as Seward's folly because the icy territory seemed barren and useless. However, less than 30 years later, the Klondike Gold Rush revealed Alaska's immense natural wealth. By the 20th century, its oil and gas reserves made it one of the most economically valuable regions in the U.S. Moreover, Alaska's strategic location became critical during the Cold War. The decision to sell was driven by Russia's fear of losing the territory to British forces in a conflict, but hindsight shows how short-sighted the deal truly was. Titanic and the lifeboats. When the Titanic set sail in 1912, it carried just 20 lifeboats, enough for about 1,200 people, far short of the 2,200 on board. At the time, maritime regulations required only enough lifeboats for half the passengers, as it was assumed other ships would assist in an emergency. This decision was compounded by the overconfidence in the ship's unsinkable design. Even worse, during the evacuation, many lifeboats left half-empty due to confusion and poor planning. The tragedy spurred significant changes in maritime safety laws, including mandatory lifeboat drills and 24-hour radio communications. The Chernobyl explosion. The Chernobyl disaster was not only a result of human error but also of systemic issues within the Soviet Union. The reactor's design flaws, such as the absence of a proper containment structure, were compounded by a culture that prioritized productivity over safety. On April 26, 1986, operators began a test during which they disabled key safety mechanisms, ignoring warnings of unstable conditions. The resulting explosion spread radioactive material across Europe, forcing the evacuation of entire towns. Decades later, Chernobyl remains a stark reminder of the dangers of cutting corners. The site is now a tourist destination, with wildlife reclaiming the area despite lingering radiation. The Library of Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria, founded in the 3rd century BCE, was an ambitious project to collect all human knowledge. It housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, including works from ancient Egypt, India, Greece, and Mesopotamia. However, its centralized structure made it vulnerable. Accounts of its destruction vary, with some blaming Julius Caesar's siege, others pointing to Christian zealots, and some to Muslim invasions. Regardless of who was responsible, the loss was catastrophic. The destruction of the library erased centuries of progress in fields like astronomy, medicine, and mathematics, setting back human development by hundreds of years. Napoleon's continental blockade. Napoleon Bonaparte's continental blockade was an ambitious plan to weaken Britain by cutting off its trade with mainland Europe. While the idea seemed sound, enforcing the blockade proved nearly impossible. Smugglers thrived, and countries like Portugal and Russia resisted, leading Napoleon to launch costly military campaigns. The blockade also hurt France's own economy, as European industries relied on British imports. By the time Napoleon's armies invaded Russia in 1812, the blockade had already failed, and the resulting campaign against Russia marked the beginning of the end for his empire. The Trojan Horse incident. The Trojan Horse story from Homer's Iliad is one of the most famous examples of deception in history. After a decade-long siege, the Greeks pretended to abandon their fight against Troy, leaving behind a massive wooden horse as an offering to the gods. Despite warnings from Trojan priest Laocoon, the horse was brought inside the city walls as a trophy of victory. That night, Greek soldiers emerged from the horse, opening the gates for their army and destroying Troy. The phrase, Trojan Horse, has since become synonymous with hidden threats, influencing everything from cybersecurity to politics. The purchase of Manhattan for beads. In 1626, Peter Minuit, a Dutch colonial governor, negotiated the purchase of Manhattan from the Lenape people for trinkets worth about $24. While often portrayed as a lopsided deal, some historians argue that the Lenape viewed land ownership differently and may not have understood the transaction in European terms. Regardless, Manhattan's transformation into one of the most valuable pieces of real estate on Earth highlights the staggering impact of this exchange. Today, its annual GDP surpasses $1.5 trillion, dwarfing the initial investment. Prohibition in the U.S. The 18th Amendment, ratified in 1920, outlawed the production, sale, and transportation of alcohol in the United States. While intended to reduce societal problems, Prohibition had the opposite effect. Bootlegging operations flourished, leading to the rise of organized crime figures like Al Capone. Speakeasies, illegal bars, proliferated, making alcohol consumption more glamorous than ever. Public backlash grew, and by 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed Prohibition. This failed experiment demonstrated the difficulty of enforcing moral legislation. Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge, nicknamed Galloping Gertie, collapsed on November 7, 1940, just 4 months after its opening. The bridge's long, narrow design made it vulnerable to wind-induced resonance, where oscillations from the wind matched the bridge's natural frequency, causing it to sway violently. Despite initial warnings from engineers, construction continued, resulting in one of the most famous structural failures in history. Today, the collapse serves as a case study for engineering students worldwide. Kodak's digital camera mistake. In 1975, Kodak engineer Steve Sasson invented the first digital camera, a groundbreaking innovation. However, Kodak's leadership feared it would cannibalize their profitable film business and chose not to develop the technology. Meanwhile, competitors like Sony and Canon embraced digital photography, dominating the market as Kodak clung to its outdated business model. By the 2010s, Kodak filed for bankruptcy, becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring innovation. The Waterloo communication error. After Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815, a French messenger misreported the event to officials in Paris, creating confusion and panic. This delay in accurate information contributed to political chaos and accelerated Napoleon's exile to St. Helena. Waterloo marked the definitive end of the Napoleonic Wars, but it also demonstrated how critical communication is during times of crisis. Coca-Cola's New Coke fiasco. In 1985, Coca-Cola replaced its beloved original formula with New Coke to compete with Pepsi. The public backlash was immediate and intense, with protests and boycotts erupting across the U.S. Within months, the company reintroduced Coca-Cola Classic, admitting defeat. This debacle remains a prime example of how brand loyalty and consumer sentiment can make or break a product. These stories remind us of the profound impact of decisions, no matter how small or well-intentioned. Whether due to hubris, ignorance, or misjudgment, these choices shape the world in ways no one could have anticipated. Which of these historical moments surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating stories from history.